Fire on the Mountain, Part 10. Why don't you get a pseudo-leg? The hip's all messed up. Nothing to work it with. Can't you hike on crutches? You probably could from here. You're already on top of the mountain. The trail coming up the river is rough, though. I'll show it to you. You can see the beginning of it from the museum. What's that noise? Yasmin pulled the starter again. Tick-conk, tick-conk, tick-conk. What is this? Tick-conk, tick-conk. The engine fired, and then there was a horrible clatter like dishes falling. Shut it off, Grissom yelled. Yasmin had already shut it off. What was that? I don't know. I think you lost your polarization. What does that mean? Are we stuck? Harriet asked. It means we switch over to planetary drive, Grissom said. Planetary? Yasmin said, moving over and letting him into the driver's seat. What's that? Mother! Harriet was already pushing, laughing. Yasmin got out and joined her. Planetary drive, gravitational, in layman's words, Grissom said. We roll down the hill. The car was rolling faster. Luckily, the old guy in the house trailer by the bridge is an internal combustion mechanic. Yasmin quit pushing and jumped into the front seat and slammed the door. I know because I interviewed him for a folklore project last summer. Harriet jumped into the back seat and slammed the door. Lewis was his name. They whooshed silently along the long curves. No, it was Levis. No. The road looped through long halls of forest. Angus! Elbow! Pelvis! Elvis! That's it. At the bottom of the mountain, after a sharp turn, they fairly flew across the river on the bridge, toward the trailers and the sycamores. Elvis Presley Cardwell. August 16th, 1859. Miss Emily Pern, 11 Commerce Street, New York. Dear Emily, I am writing to tell you that my plans changed. I went to Bethel Church last night and saw the great Frederick Douglass. Instead of a funeral, I attended a birth. Instead of a rain of tears, the thunder of righteousness. Even I, with my conservative, as you say, Southern ways, was moved. How like a lion is Douglass, a statesman, a philosopher, and a fighter in one. And he has done more in these 2 days to alter my opinions on how to end slavery. I had started to say on slavery, but my opinions on that evil institution were long ago fixed. Than any other event or individual save, I must own, perhaps yourself. I went to Baltimore only to find that my uncle had accompanied his son's body south, to Mint Springs, our farm in Staunton, saying that since John had died for Virginia, he must be buried there. So I returned to Philadelphia in time to reach Bethel Church before Douglass. The notes I had hoped to get from others I took myself, and it was well that I did, since my friends were busy with other matters, as you will see. Here they are, transcribed for you from the Latin, which has served me well these 4 years. The church was secured by some 50 abbes, many of them students, some of them friends of mine, and others, I am sure, friends of yours, and all armed with belaying pins from the docks. The greater number, perhaps half, were free, colored, most of them Unionist from the seaport, but tradesmen and craftsmen as well. Some Irish stevedores as well. They were all led by a colored teamster named Adam, who was a stalwart of the movement here and apparently an intimate of Douglass, although he appears to be entirely innocent of letters. Over 500 filled the church, and an even greater number filled the street outside, since the whole town had cause to think that Douglass would speak on the subject of Brown's attack, which, as you must have heard by now, he did. It was also known that federal marshals had a warrant for Douglass, since his name, among others, had been found among the effects left behind by Brown in the Maryland farmhouse from which he launched the assault that shook not only the South, but the nation. If the marshals and writ servers were in the crowd, though, they were invisible and kept their peace, at least at first. Also, if the copperheads and slave catchers had any intentions, they were not so bold, not that night, as to make them known. Certainly the street, filled as it was with the young, the hopeful, the working people, and half of them freed colored, was a Republican and friendly crowd for Douglass. My friend and former French instructor Lavasseur said of the crowd of the street that it looked like Paris in '48. Lev was one of the stalwarts on call, as he put it, in case of trouble, and in addition to the pin stuck in his waistcoat, He had tucked a Lefebvre repeater in the top of one of Victor Hugo boot. I caught only a glimpse of this, as my friend is not the type, like others who were plentiful last night, to show it off as a vain augmentation of manliness. We heard Douglas approaching long before he arrived. It sounded like a storm coming through the mountains, the trees waving and sighing overhead before the wind and rain that moved them are felt. This was the murmuring of the crowd outside the church doors. Everyone in the church stood as he came in the door and down the aisle, like the priest in the church of man, whispered Levasseur, who has a Jacobin turn of mind to fit his colorful waistcoats and high boots. The atmosphere was electrical. The colored minister, before introducing Douglas, alarmed I think by the mood and spirit of the crowd, called on God to fill our hearts with peace and love. Douglas's first words might have displeased old Robespierre, but not of course John Brown, and Levasseur seemed well enough pleased himself, for they also called upon God, though not the God of the slave owners. Almighty God, Douglas said, and if the God didn't answer, it wasn't because he didn't call out loudly enough. Fill our hearts with love, but not with peace, not yet. It is too soon for peace. Fill them rather with a tempest, with a storm of love for man, and a tempest love for freedom. And also fill, here he paused, and his voice dropped, fill our hearts with hatred. Here the crowd, including myself, gasped. Hatred for evil. Hatred for slavery, the foul enemy of man and freedom and love. Slavery which degrades both subject and master. A roar, half response and half applause, filled the hall, and Douglas held up his hand, but could no longer stop it. He let it wash over him like a wave. He is a giant in stature as well as principle, 6 feet tall, wearing a pepper and salt suit of rather ordinary cut and dark silk tie, no Jacobin, looking more like a banker than a revolutionist. Until he speaks. For there is no stiffness about his features. Just as his voice is like a chorus, his face is like a company of players in which humor, tragedy, wisdom, and courage are all on the stage at once. Though not exactly handsome, he is more distinguished in appearance than any colored man I have ever seen. His head almost looks too large for his body, and his massy hair gives it a leonine look. He is the very opposite of stooped. If that be possible, he is bent a little upward toward the sky, and his voice rolls out like thunder. There is much talk and speculation about a certain commotion down south, he said, to laughter and some cheers. There are even those who rumor that my hand was involved. Here he studied his hand as if puzzled. More cheers. There are rumors about another African, a woman who is well known and well hated by the slavers, a thief, this wicked woman, who regularly steals their property and then defies them to steal it back. More tumult and cheers. There is a talk of an old man, no gentleman he, but a rough-handed drover and tradesman, a man of God whose hands know both the Bible and the sword, a white man well known to the slavers out Kansas way. A regular tumult greeted these words. Douglas put a stop to it by raising his hand, then lowered his voice and addressed the waiting silence. My friends, I did not come here to put all these rumors to rest. I come to encourage them. History will complete the roll call of the heroes of Harper's Ferry, but I will say this, and say it for certainty. Here he paused again and peered out across the crowd, as if looking for a face and then finding it. Many of you were there, you, and you, and you, he pointed dramatically in spirit, were there. The true lovers of abolition and liberty all were there, Sharp's rifles in hand, or will be there, he fairly thundered, ready to consecrate with willing blood a long overdue and long neglected bond of brotherhood with the most oppressed and despised of humanity. After this last tumult died down, Douglas adjusted his tie, waved his hand, and seemed to call forth another, more thoughtful mood. The crowd was eager for more rhetoric, especially couched in such praise, but now he changed his tune. But not yet, my friends, not all of us. This consummation is yet to come. Some of us stayed home. Some of us, and I don't exclude myself, stayed home. Some of us, and here I admit it, Emily, my ears burned, love peace more than freedom. Some of you whites would give the African his freedom, but not give him the gun with which to take it. Not Brown. Some of us Africans would ask for freedom, but not take up sharps and fight for it. Not Tubman. Not those of us who are with them tonight, either in spirit or on the mountain, those of us who are true abolitionists. And here the word had a deeper and freer ring than I'd ever heard before, bespeaking the end not just of slavery, but of all darkness and ignorance and hatred. Sons of man and reason, whether African or European, white or black, slave or free. There was suddenly the sound of a scuffle outside, and a banging at the great church doors. With a signal from a colored man, Levasseur was directed to the balcony, and at his gesture I followed, though hesitating. Democratical as I am, I found it surprising to see a Frenchman taking orders from an African, and was reluctant to add a Virginian to this unusual chain of command. But Lev seemed not to notice my hesitation, and I had to either follow him or be left behind. In these speculations, and in moving upstairs, I lost the next few moments of Douglas's mighty talk. From the balcony, we were looking down at the packed church and at Douglas in the pulpit, with a stout Negro armed with a staff at his either side. The banging at the door continued, but he spoke over it. Think for a moment. What if John Brown had failed? What if he and his soldiers had been killed, or worse, captured? Oh, many a grand speech would then be made. Oh, what fiery denunciations of Virginia's cruelty we would then applaud. Brown and Tubman would be heroes and martyrs. Their men would be examples to all of the willingness to sacrifice in the fight against slavery. End of part 10.